Across major ports of entry in the United States, customs systems are preparing for a significant administrative transition. For most people, this change is invisible. Containers move, trucks cross bridges, cargo planes land and unload, retail shelves remain stocked. Yet behind the scenes, trade policy adjustments are being translated into new classifications, revised tariff codes, and updated compliance instructions. Recent legal developments have reshaped the framework under which certain tariffs were imposed. In response to a Supreme Court ruling that limited the executive branch's authority under one statute, the administration announced that it would rely on a different section of federal trade law to continue implementing tariffs. The shift has created a moment of uncertainty for businesses, lawmakers, and international partners. To understand what is unfolding, it is important to separate three layers of this story: the legal ruling, the executive response, and the broader economic and diplomatic consequences. First, the legal dimension. The Supreme Court of the United States issued a decision interpreting the scope of presidential authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The court concluded that this specific statute does not authorize the imposition of tariffs in the manner previously attempted. The ruling did not eliminate all trade powers available to the executive branch. Rather, it clarified limits under one particular law. Legal scholars note that trade authority in the United States is shared between Congress and the President. Congress has constitutional authority over commerce with foreign nations, but over decades it has delegated certain powers to the executive branch under specific statutes. When courts interpret those statutes, they are not necessarily rejecting trade policy itself. They are defining the legal boundaries within which policy must operate. Following the ruling, the administration turned to Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. This provision allows temporary trade measures in situations involving balance of payments concerns. Unlike the statute previously used, Section 122 contains explicit time limits and procedural conditions. It permits short-term action but anticipates congressional involvement for longer extensions. Supporters of the move argue that it demonstrates the executive branch's flexibility in responding to trade imbalances. Critics argue that it stretches the intended purpose of the law. Constitutional experts suggest that further judicial review is possible if legal challenges arise. For importers and customs professionals, the immediate issue is practical rather than philosophical. Tariff codes must be updated, classification systems must align with the new legal authority, compliance software must be revised, brokers must verify exemptions, even small technical misalignments can delay shipments. At high-volume crossings such as the Ambassador Bridge, thousands of trucks pass daily. A minor disruption in customs processing can ripple through supply chains. Automotive components, agricultural goods, electronics, and consumer products often move on tightly scheduled timelines. Businesses operate on thin margins and precise inventory management systems. When tariff frameworks change, companies must recalculate landed costs. Contracts negotiated months earlier may require renegotiation. Smaller firms in particular face difficulty absorbing sudden adjustments. Some may pass costs on to consumers, others may delay orders or reduce shipments. Economists caution that the full impact of tariff shifts depends on duration and scope. Temporary measures can create short-term price volatility. Longer measures may influence sourcing decisions, investment flows, and currency movements. The Congressional Budget Office has previously modeled scenarios in which sustained tariffs modestly increase consumer prices and slightly reduce overall economic growth. Independent research institutions often reach similar conclusions. Tariffs can protect specific industries, but may also increase costs for manufacturers that rely on imported inputs. Manufacturing groups are divided. Some domestic producers view tariffs as essential tools to counter unfair trade practices. Others, especially those integrated into global supply chains, argue that higher input costs weaken competitiveness. Meanwhile, international reactions are unfolding in measured but noticeable ways. The European Union has signaled that it is reviewing its existing trade understandings with the United States. in light of the legal ruling and subsequent policy shift. European officials emphasize the importance of predictability in transatlantic commerce. Businesses on both sides of the Atlantic rely on stable tariff commitments when planning investments. If trade partners perceive uncertainty, they may delay ratification of agreements or seek clarifications. Diplomats often prefer to avoid public confrontation, but behind closed doors, discussions intensify when legal foundations shift. India, Japan, the United Kingdom, South Korea, and several Southeast Asian economies have also negotiated trade arrangements with the United States in recent years. Each government must now assess how the Supreme Court ruling affects the broader trade environment. None of these countries have announced immediate withdrawal from agreements. However, analysts note that leverage in trade negotiations can change quickly when domestic legal constraints become visible. In North America, attention is focused on the agreement known in the United States as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, often abbreviated as USMCA. In Canada, it is referred to as CUSMA. Trade between the United States and Canada is among the largest bilateral relationships in the world. Integrated industries, especially automotive, energy, and agriculture, depend on cross-border coordination. Canada's leadership has responded cautiously. Public statements emphasize respect for judicial processes and the need for clarity in implementation. Rather than escalating rhetoric, Canadian officials appear to be monitoring developments while preparing for upcoming review mechanisms built into the trade agreement. Strategists in Ottawa recognize that temporary U.S. tariff authority under Section 122 carries a defined time frame. If Congress does not extend the measure, it expires automatically. That creates a built-in negotiation clock. From a political standpoint within the United States, reactions span party lines. Some members of Congress argue that trade authority should return more explicitly to the legislative branch. Others support strong executive tools to respond quickly to economic pressures. The debate reflects a long-running tension in American governance. How much unilateral authority should a president possess in matters affecting global commerce? Consumer advocates focus on household costs. If tariffs increase import prices, those increases can eventually appear in grocery bills, construction materials, and retail goods. The extent varies depending on product categories and substitution options. Agricultural exporters are also watching closely. U.S. farmers depend heavily on foreign markets. When tariffs escalate in one direction, retaliatory measures sometimes follow. Even the possibility of retaliation can influence futures markets and planting decisions. Financial markets respond not only to enacted policy, but also to perceived stability. Currency values, bond yields, and equity prices can shift based on expectations about trade duration. Investors typically favor predictability. Sudden legal reversals create short-term volatility, though markets often stabilize once new rules are clarified. At the administrative level, customs agencies face operational challenges. Updating internal systems requires coordination among federal departments. Training officers on new procedures takes time. Trade compliance professionals must interpret guidance documents quickly and accurately. Large multinational corporations often have legal teams dedicated to trade compliance. Smaller importers may rely on external brokers. In either case, clarity from government agencies is essential. The legal question of refunds has also emerged. When a court limits authority under which tariffs were collected, affected parties sometimes seek reimbursement. However, refund processes can be complex and lengthy, often requiring additional litigation or administrative procedures. It would be premature to predict outcomes. Courts may determine whether previously collected duties were lawfully assessed under alternative interpretations, or whether Congress chooses to intervene legislatively. The broader economic context also matters. The United States remains one of the world's largest economies, with a strong currency and deep capital markets. A temporary tariff measure under Section 122 does not necessarily indicate systemic financial crisis. Rather, it reflects a policy choice within existing statutory tools. Trade policy debates frequently intersect with electoral cycles. Lawmakers consider not only economic theory but also political realities in their districts. Regions dependent on manufacturing, agriculture, or ports of entry may evaluate tariffs differently. Within the executive branch, trade representatives, commerce officials, and economic advisors must balance domestic objectives with international credibility. Negotiations rely on trust as much as leverage. When legal frameworks change, diplomats work to reassure counterparts that agreements remain meaningful. For Canada, economic pressures are real. Certain sectors have experienced reduced exports and job adjustments. Food prices have been influenced by multiple factors, including global commodity shifts, energy costs, and currency fluctuations. Trade friction adds another variable. However, Canada has also diversified trade relationships in recent years. Agreements with the European Union and participation in Asia-Pacific partnerships expand options. Diversification does not eliminate dependence on U.S. markets, but it provides alternative channels. In Washington, policymakers now face strategic choices. Congress could endorse the temporary tariff measure, modify it, or allow it to lapse. Each option carries implications for negotiation dynamics with key partners. Observers are watching three immediate indicators. First, implementation efficiency. If customs transitions proceed smoothly, market disruption may remain limited. If delays or classification disputes emerge, supply chains could feel pressure. Second, diplomatic signaling. Statements from major trade partners reveal whether confidence is holding or eroding. A freeze in negotiations or ratification would signal caution. Third, domestic legislative engagement. If bipartisan coalitions form around reclaiming trade authority, the long-term balance of power between Congress and the executive branch could shift. Trade history shows that legal and political turbulence often precedes recalibration rather than collapse. Agreements evolve, statutes are amended, courts clarify boundaries, businesses adapt. For households, the central question remains practical. Will prices rise, fall, or stabilize? The answer depends on duration, scope, and global response. Short-term volatility does not always translate into sustained inflation, but extended tariffs can embed costs more deeply. For global partners, credibility matters. Governments negotiate based on expectations of continuity. When courts redefine authority, partners seek assurances that future commitments will withstand domestic scrutiny. For the administration, the challenge lies in demonstrating that policy adjustments remain within legal bounds while advancing stated economic goals. For Congress, the moment raises fundamental constitutional questions about trade governance. And for the customs officers, brokers, and logistics managers operating quietly at ports and border crossings, the focus is operational clarity. Systems must function regardless of political debate. This is not merely a dispute about percentages on imported goods. It is a case study in how democratic institutions interact. Courts interpret statutes, executives respond with alternative tools, legislatures consider oversight, and international partners evaluate reliability. In the coming months, negotiations surrounding North American trade frameworks will test strategic patience. Time-limited authority creates leverage for those willing to wait. Expiration dates concentrate attention. At the same time, global trade does not pause. Ships depart. Contracts are signed, crops are harvested, technology components are assembled, the world economy continues moving even as legal frameworks shift. It is possible that Congress will codify a revised tariff structure. It is possible that negotiations will yield new compromises. It is possible that courts will again be asked to interpret statutory boundaries. None of these outcomes are guaranteed. What is clear is that this moment underscores the complexity of trade governance in a globalized economy. Authority is layered, consequences are interconnected, decisions made in courtrooms and executive offices reverberate through warehouses and households. For viewers seeking clarity, the key is to watch institutional actions rather than rhetoric. monitor legislative proposals, observe customs guidance, track statements from major trade partners, evaluate economic data over time rather than reacting to immediate headlines. Trade policy rarely unfolds in a straight line. It moves through cycles of assertion, challenge, adjustment, and compromise. As this story develops, careful attention to verified information will matter more than speculation. Balanced analysis helps separate structural change from political messaging. We will continue following legislative developments, court interpretations, diplomatic responses, and economic indicators to provide clear and responsible coverage. If you value measured, fact-based reporting without exaggeration or personal attacks, consider staying engaged with the channel. Share your perspective respectfully in the comments. Civil discussion strengthens understanding. Global trade affects workers, businesses, and consumers across borders. It deserves careful examination grounded in law, economics, and verified facts. This remains a developing situation. Institutions are responding, markets are adjusting, diplomacy is ongoing, and as always, informed viewers are better equipped to understand what comes next.